So today is the last day of the Christian year. It's Christ the King, or Reign of Christ Sunday. Today is the end of the year, and next week starts our Christian New Year. It's the celebration then of Advent and the anticipation of the coming of Christ. So today, at the end of the year, we celebrate Christ's reign, and then next week we start it all over again with the preparation for the birth of Christ. But today we celebrate Christ's reign, Christ's rule over all things, including us. Now, this celebration of Christ the King Sunday is a relatively new one within the history of the church. It originated in the Catholic Church a century ago, 100 years ago, in 1925, so exactly 100 years ago. Pope Pius XI introduced this festival of Christ the King to combat the rising secularization and nationalism that he saw in the world at that time. And to be honest, I'm not so sure it worked, at least by that measure. I mean, it seems to me that the world continues to be both more secular, as in less interested in religious or spiritual concerns, and the world also seems to be more nationalistic, as in identifying and claiming our own national identity and excluding others. So if secularization and nationalism still continue to plague our world, we might say that this festival did not accomplish its intended purpose. Or we could say that we need this festival now more than ever as we combat secularization and nationalism. The celebration of Christ the King Sunday became quite popular, and soon it spread to other denominations beyond the Catholic Church, eventually including ours, the United Methodist Church. So today we join Christians of many different denominations to give thanks for Christ, our King, and to be reminded that all nations fall under God's reign, the reign of God's Son, Jesus Christ. And to remind the world that we all of us live under this reign, whether we acknowledge it or not. So this celebration continues to hold an important place in the church year, to remind us that Jesus is our King, that there is only one King, that Jesus is the King of all kings, in fact. But what does this mean? What does it mean, really? What kind of king is Jesus? Well, our gospel lesson today helps us to answer that question. Now, admittedly, it seems rather odd to hear this story, the Passion story, the story of Jesus' crucifixion at this time of year. The gospel this text feels out of place for today. Why are we hearing this story now when we've already heard it once during this church year, back right before Easter during Holy Week? Isn't hearing the Good Friday story once a year enough? Why do we need to hear it again? Well, we need to hear it again because it tells us what kind of king Jesus really is. And I also think that we need to hear it again because the injustice and the violence that are revealed in this particular text are an everyday occurrence in our lives and in our world. And maybe we need to hear it again because we too often ignore or accommodate or even participate in violence. We need to hear this again because too often we easily ignore or accommodate or even participate in violence. Maybe we need to hear it again today because despite all of that, today, Christ the King Sunday reminds us of the reign of Christ. And it reminds us that the way of Jesus is non-violent. The reign of Christ, the way of Jesus is non-violent. So as we look at Jesus on the cross in today's text, what do you see? How does it make you feel? Well, I don't know about you, but I don't really want to watch Jesus hanging there on the cross. I don't want to watch him die. I don't want to watch them cast lots to divide his clothing. I don't want to watch the leaders scoff at him or the soldiers mock him or one of the criminals deride him. I can't watch that. I simply can't watch that happen. But I admit that the thing that really frightens me about this whole scene, the thing that really frightens me about it is how Jesus responds. How Jesus responds to the injustice and to the violence. Jesus forgives them. He doesn't scoff, he doesn't mock, he doesn't deride, he doesn't judge them, he doesn't condemn them, he doesn't return tit for tat or retaliate or seek some kind of revenge. He doesn't call them names, he doesn't yell or curse at them, he doesn't express anger. He neither speaks nor acts with violence. He chooses to suffer violence and injustice rather than be their cause, rather than be the cause of those things. Today's gospel presents to us an image of a non-violent Jesus. And if I'm being honest, that is what frightens me. Maybe it frightens you too. Maybe you and I should be afraid. Not of Jesus, but of the violence within ourselves. If we claim to be Christians and to follow the way of Jesus, then we also are to become non-violent in our thoughts, nonviolent in our words, nonviolent in our actions. If nonviolence is the way of Jesus, then what does that mean for us and for things like the war in Ukraine? What does it mean for that? What does it mean for the violence we see around us, the murder-suicide that happened in Tiffin on Wednesday night that claimed 4 lives and was all over the news? What does it mean for the 68 school shootings that we have seen already this calendar year? On a more personal level, right here with us in our hearts, if nonviolence is the way of Jesus, then what does it mean for us in our everyday encounters with things like the way we drive, or the words or the tone that we use on social media? When I speak of violence, I'm not only talking about wars and felonious criminal activity. I'm talking about all the ways that we hurt ourselves and the ways that we hurt others, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I'm talking about the ways that we diminish or the ways that we negate the human dignity of ourselves and others by what we think and do and say. I don't think that nonviolence is something that we achieve, but it's a path. It's a path we follow. Addressing violence in our lives and in our world is a spiritual journey. It's something that we grow into. We believe that the Spirit is transforming us. And it's not only about the violence that we do to others, but even the violence that we do to ourselves. Maybe that's where nonviolence has to begin. Maybe the reason that Jesus could be nonviolent toward others was because he was first nonviolent toward himself. Maybe the first step in addressing violence in our world today is to deal with the violence that we inflict on ourselves. What violence are you inflicting on yourself today? Do you ever put yourself down? Or call yourself names? Or berate or ridicule yourself? What are the things, the regrets, the guilt, the missed opportunities with which you still continue to beat yourself up? Are you denying yourself forgiveness? How do you feel about yourself, your life, your body, and soul? In what ways are you hurting yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually? Can you give yourself a break and show yourself a little grace and compassion? What if you truly believed that you are a beloved child of God, a child with whom God is well pleased? What if you began listening to a voice of self-love rather than those critical voices in the back of your mind? What would it be like to live with unconditional love toward yourself? How might you start to make peace with yourself? Imagine if we let unconditional love toward ourselves and peacemaking with ourselves become the starting point for our relationships with others. Or, as Jesus says, loving our neighbors as ourselves. We might begin to recognize our neighbor, or him or her, to be as sacred as ourselves, or that his or her hopes and needs can be as valid and as important as our own. We might feel less need to prove or to defend or to justify ourselves. It might take our own fear and anger down a notch. Last week we talked about don't feed the fears. If we take our own fear and anger down a notch through this self-love, if that were all to happen, how might it change what we think, the words we choose, or the things we do? Now, I don't think I don't think I have ever been driving down the street and said, "Oh, that child of God just cut me off." I have, however, referred to her or him as that son of something else who cut me off. So what if we start small and we begin to replace our everyday, ordinary acts of violence with non-violence? Non-violent driving, non-violent posting on social media, non-violent self-talk might be good ways to begin. What if nonviolence toward ourselves and one another was our vision for the future? What if we worked for a nonviolent self and we grew from there to a nonviolent household, and then to a nonviolent street, and then to a nonviolent Lakewood and a nonviolent Ohio, and you get the idea. What would it look like for you? What would it mean for you today? What would it offer you, and what would it ask of you? I suspect the kingdom would indeed come on earth here as it is in heaven. And I don't know that we can fully eliminate violence from our world, but do we have to continue adding to it in our everyday actions? On this Christ the King Sunday, may we truly let Christ reign in our hearts. May Christ's reign of non-violence reign in us. Amen.